Hey, Build 42 is now here and man oh man has gameplay changed. In this video I'm going to go over all the changes so you can survive longer and live a happy life in the zombie apocalypse. Well, relatively happy that is, because you're going to die. Today we're going to take a deep dive into all things skills and talk about some of the changes that have been made in terms of skills compared to Build 41. But before I go into skills, and now I know I mentioned this in my last video, but the progression of the skill tree is now different. First off, you can learn new things two separate ways. The old way where you find and read a magazine is still there, but if you're lucky enough to find the magazine. Then there's a new way, what I call learn by doing. For example, the How-To Generator magazine will immediately teach you how to use and connect a generator. However, at level 3 electrical, you will gain this knowledge automatically. This applies to a lot of the magazines we used to have to search for in order to gain the knowledge. It also opens up the door for doing an illiterate run where in the past would forever keep you paywalled and unable to power anything or work on cars. Unfortunately, you won't know what additional things you can craft until you reach the appropriate skill level, meaning they're hidden until you get there. With that said, first up, fishing. Fishing has changed. What used to be a simple click and fast forward is now more of a mini game of sorts where you bait your pole, equip your fishing pole with both hands, and then cast your line into bubbles in the water and wait. When you catch a nibble, it turns into a game where you try not to go into the yellow or red while reeling it in. It's a mini game of sorts, and I'm on the fence as to whether I like it or not. I'm sure those who like the fishing elements of Zomboid will though. Like Build 41, fishing comes with all sorts of tackle, and there are numerous things you can now bait fish with, including insects, small fish, crawfish, and even meat. You can also craft more hooks that go beyond the paperclip, which was synonymous with Build 41. The types of fish you will catch will be dependent on what bait you're using and what time of year it is. Oh, and spearfishing is no longer a thing. You cannot spearfish in Build 42. A couple things I noticed when fishing: the lower level you are, the less accurate you are with your casting your line. So you may cast towards the bubbles, but cast nearby instead. I believe this is one of the mechanics they are using to determine fishing skill. If your cast doesn't land on the bubbles, there's still a chance to catch something, but the chances are much lower. Secondly, the further you can cast your line, the more likely you'll be able to bag a fish. The closer you cast to the shore, the more likely you'll pull up trash and other debris, which may or may not be a bad thing, by the way. On a side note, I was trying to do a primitive run, and my only source of rags and water bottles early on was fishing the trash out of the lake I was living nearby. Foraging has got an overhaul as well, with a ton of new items to forage. One of the first things you'll notice is that there are many different types of wood in the world to forage. This is used mainly for carving, which we'll get into later, but one of the more useful wood types is the wooden rod, which has replaced the sturdy stick of Build 41. There's also clay, which is used for both masonry and pottery, as well as flint nodules, which will make sharp flint shards used for cutting and leveling up knapping. Fruits, vegetables, trash, and insects, all the usual stuff, but just more of it. Additionally, as you level up foraging, more specific items will open up for you to specifically forage for, much like Build 41. One of the first things you can specifically look for is animal tracks. Tracking is a new skill in Build 42 and can be found on the foraging menu. Basically, you can focus on finding tracks and signs of animal passing while searching. When you do find the tracks or animal poo, it will give you some information regarding how old the tracks and direction it was heading in. The higher the tracking skill, the more successful you'll be with finding more tracks. When using the tracking skill, it's important to know that certain zones will have a higher likelihood of finding animal tracks. For example, tracking in a farmland zone will give a better chance of finding tracks than, say, the forest, which feels a little backwards to me, but I didn't make this game, so there's that. One thing to note here, tracking animals and hunting them are two different skills. Your aim will need to be high enough to bag a deer. Farming or food agriculture is next up and got a huge makeover. Gone are the days where you can plop down potatoes and cabbage and expect something to happen. There are dozens of things that you can now plant, but there is a catch. You now have to plant seasonally, which works out pretty good as you don't need as much area since you are planting different things depending on the time of year. However, coming into a new game, you don't know what plants you are supposed to plant without finding the appropriate magazine. I found this out the hard way when I indiscriminately laid out plots of potatoes and corn, only to find out that neither could grow in the season I was in when I found the magazine. XP gains come from harvesting, just like in Build 41. Next up is animal husbandry. Basically, it's exactly what you would imagine. All throughout the map, you'll find cows, chickens, sheep, and pigs that you can grab and make your own. You'll need a rope and in some cases food to lure an animal to you. Throughout Knox County, there'll be animal zones in which you can plop down your animals and start to tend them. My first go, I learned the hard way that you'll need food to keep them healthy as well as water. Who would have thunk that? For this, you need food troughs. To add food, you simply take a bag of animal feed and drop it directly into the trough. For water, you add water into the other trough. Whenever it rains, the water trough will fill back up. The animals will not drink from rainwater on the ground, by the way. Luckily, animals eat grass, and you can get that grass relatively easy by using a scythe and then dumping the grass debris in a trough. For chickens, you'll need a hutch, while cows could do very well with a shelter, although it isn't necessary. It's important to realize that once you discover animals on a farm, they will die eventually if you don't grab them. You can increase your skill with animal care by caring for your animals. Things like petting as well as milking your cows and shearing your sheep will all increase your animal skill. Petting is probably the easiest way to gain XP for animal husbandry. And speaking of troughs and hutches, one of the things I've noticed fairly quickly is how some skills require other skills to do stuff. So for example, if you're doing the animal rancher thing and you need a trough, you will need Carpentry level 3 to do it. Same thing goes for butchering a large animal. You'll need a butcher hook, which requires a level 3 in Carpentry. The reason why I mention this is because you may want to think about adding more skill traits to hasten advancement during character creation. Which brings us up to butchering. You can butcher an animal like you did in Build 41. With a knife and a surface, and your butchering level will dictate exactly how much meat you get from the animal as well as the quality of your butchery. But you won't be able to strip an animal of other useful materials without a butcher hook, something that you attach a large animal to and strip it of items like bones and leather, which you can in turn use for other things and in other crafting stations. One hand washes the other sort of thing. Your maintenance skill has become way more important than just how long a weapon will last. For one thing, axe heads and other sharp things can be sharpened and reattached, but you will need a high enough maintenance skill for those things to show up in your crafting. For example, if you can find a whetstone with a maintenance skill of 1, you can sharpen your dull axes. And speaking of axes, crafting a stone axe now requires a maintenance of 1 and a surface to work from. In fact, I would say if you were going to choose an occupation or trait starting out and wanted access to a lot more crafting options, choose one with a +1 in maintenance. A caveat to maintenance: fighting with a non-traditional weapon like a pipe will not improve your maintenance skill. You must fight with either crafted weapons or things considered to be weapons. Unfortunately, a crowbar is not considered a traditional weapon. Go figure. The good news to maintenance is that now things like sharpening that axe blade will give XP, which makes sense because you are maintaining your weapon. Carving is another brand new skill in Build 42 and could be one of the most important skills, as carving handles to replace older handles will be a thing now. Axes dull and handles get worn. These are two certainties in the zombie apocalypse. It will also be a very important skill when primitive living becomes a thing. One thing to note here: carving skill will dictate how good the handle of your weapon is. One more thing of note: once you get past carving level 3, you can take a branch and carve a long handle, and then take the long handle and carve a medium handle all the way down to a short handle and get all the experience with carving all the way down. I'm just going to cover fighting skills very quickly and broadly with saying this. The muscle strain effect, which will be very controversial, won't go away as your weapon skills go up, but they will lessen muscle strain because you won't take as many hits to down a zombie. Tailoring has got a bit of love in Build 42. In Build 41, it seemed like the most you could do was patch holes and get thread by ripping clothes. In Build 42, you won't be getting thread by ripping clothes, but instead using a needle to extract thread from ripped items. By the way, you'll need to be level 1 tailoring to do it. Who'd have thunk that getting thread would require skill? The main aspects of tailoring is stitching together armor and making clothes from burlap. I won't get into all the things tailoring, but let's just say they've covered a lot of bases, and this is before getting into the workstation crafting for tailoring. Kind of interesting that your first bit of armor you can tailor is magazine body armor, but I digress. Both welding and metalworking skills tie into blacksmithing, and strangely enough have been separated. Metalworking is basically the things that we could do in Build 41, like make iron bars, metal gates, and barricades. Welding are things that we make from metal and include making armor, blades, and cookware. One of the things you will immediately notice is that without a workstation, blacksmithing is not even listed as an option when you are trying to craft, but metalworking is. To do all things welding, you're going to need to either make or find a forge or furnace, ideally both. Carpentry has gotten a rebalance of sorts in terms of building and carpentry requirements. I will say this: without carpentry, you'll only be able to craft the most basic of things, and building things will be terribly difficult. The only way to gain XP from carpentry now is by building and crafting things associated with carpentry. Dismantling furniture does not generate experience in the carpentry tree, And starting at level 0, there's going to be very few things you can build. They have adjusted the requirements for things like stair making down to level 3 and separated carpentry from making furniture, although I'm pretty sure both give carpentry experience. Not being able to generate XP from disassembly is disappointing and may cause issues for those who would prefer city life to building, because many of the workstations require a fair amount of carpentry experience to make them. But it makes sense. I don't see how I could gain much knowledge, never mind become an expert in carpentry, simply by breaking down all the beds in a neighborhood in real life. If only. If you plan on doing farming, just be aware you will need a fair amount of carpentry skill to make things you need. Still, the quickest way to learning carpentry is to either watch them TV shows in the first 7 days or watch VHS tapes after reading the skill books. Napping is a very specialized skill, and the only reason why I would see napping skill as a good thing is if you were doing a primitive run. Mind you, leveling up napping will take seemingly forever if you start at level 0, because literally the only thing you'll be able to nap is a sharp flint flake. I would imagine this would be like dismantling of digital watches, kind of painful to level up this skill we all got used to in Build 41. And honestly, unless you are into wilderness survival, napping may not be the thing for you, as you can find most of the other stuff in the city. As an aside, I did try to do a wilderness run, and I have to say that they just aren't there yet. Most things still require man-made tools, so building things will be rough. But they are working on it. Napping could become very important when they are able to hash out primitive survival. There haven't been many changes with electrical other than at the time of this video, digital watches no longer give experience for electrical. That said, there have been a ton of new things added to the world, such as hairdryers that you can dismantle for XP, not to mention all the other things that you can dismantle in Build 41 for electrical XP. The one big change is that you can now operate generators with an electrical level 3, which is super nice and gives you a reason to continue working on that electrical skill. Finally, we have the mechanical skill. At the time of this video, you won't get experience from pulling batteries or changing headlights, which was one of the things most of us did to get mechanical 2 to be able to hotwire cars. Which means that the mechanical skill will likely be super difficult and slow to level up, at least initially. Personally, I don't have a problem with this. I think that slowing the progression of the game will make for a longer game overall, provided that you can survive long enough. One of the bigger changes is that uninstalling different components of your vehicle is going to require different tools. For example, a wrench will need to be used to uninstall a door, but that same wrench can't be used to pull a battery. And finally, we have pottery and glass making, which I didn't have a chance to test and frankly have been told they're more for aesthetic purposes, so I won't comment on these. Well, that's about it for now. If you haven't subscribed, do so, leave a thumbs up, comment, all that algorithm, yada yada. And if watching streams is your thing, I stream here on YouTube. Until next time, my name's Drunkonlife, and I'll see you later.